Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone, wherever you are. Given the news of the day and the events unfolding, it's hard to do this and not think that I'm in some way contributing to the bread and circuses. So I don't want people to think, oh, blah blah blah. La, 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 let's talk about amps when all this stuff is happening. But at this moment, that's about all we can do from a distance. Maybe I should spend all this time calling my senators, but all my state senators are... Anyway, let's try to talk about the breads and circuses. And I know that I have a lot of international visitors to my channel, viewers of the channel who are here. And it's nice to know that in some small way, I can kind of send, messages out from the asylum and let you know that we're not all on board with this stuff. Anyway, let me shake it off, because you're not here to talk about or to hear about my view of the world necessarily, but I didn't want to just go like, hey, let's talk about Marshalls, blah, blah, blah. Can we just talk about amps, please? Well, we will talk about amps, gringo, but I didn't want to be, just blithe as if none of that matters. Anyway, I saw, first of all, we had a super chat here from Bob Adam. Hey, Bob, any opinions on the Morley hum exterminator? How about the pile hum eliminator? It's hard to keep those straight. I play a Line 6 Pod Express in stereo with 2 Princeton clones. The Morley works, but it's not the best way to do it because it's actually lifting your safety ground. It has a few safeguards. It's not entirely unsafe, but it's not the best way to do it. The pile stuff is pretty inexpensive, and you get what you pay for. Since I saw the super chat 20 minutes ago, I actually do have something lined up to share with you. So let me put this up here. In the comments right now is a link to a radial product that I think would be the right solution, because it's going to be lifting the audio ground, not the safety ground, and it's doing it with very high quality transformers, and that's the way to do it. And you just put that after your stereo outs of your Line 6 device, and then run out to your amps from there, and it will grow if your rig expands, changes down the line. That can be a good constant, and it's high quality, won't negatively impact the sound. Phil and Catherine. Hey, Phil and Catherine. Watched the TPS AB of the DRs, the 64 and 65, sounded very different tonally, had different audio tapers, different speaker sensitivities, clipped differently, etc. Makes sense. And Anthony Calderas said, hey, Dan and Mick from TPS just put out a video on the 65 Deluxe Reverb reissue versus the 64 Deluxe Reverb Custom. Interesting comparisons, just wondering if I'd give it a watch. I have not watched that. The rest of the news of the world is bad enough already without me beating my head against the desk on that front. I really like Dan and Mick, and I think when they're in their element, they really know what they're talking about. When it comes to amplifiers, they, like many very good guitarists with the best of intentions, come across kind of like blind men describing an elephant. The Deluxe Reverbs they're comparing are very, very different amps with very, very different circuits with very, very different speakers. The Deluxe Reverb, the 65 reissue Deluxe Reverb, is an inexpensive build of an actual Deluxe Reverb that's usually crippled from the factory by the fact that it has a really painful bright cap, like the originals did, and a terrible speaker. The hand-wired custom 64, first of all, it's not really hand-wired, or at least those hands are not qualified to make amps. It's a crappy PCB board disguised as a real board. It's disguised as eyelet board. It's not. It's not the Deluxe Reverb circuit. They have both channels summed before the reverb stage in a terrible, noisy way. and it has a bias tremolo, not the opto tremolo of the actual Deluxe Reverb. And that means the output section behaves differently at all times. And there are some limitations. It's not a good sounding amp. It's not well built. It's extremely expensive, but it does come with a good speaker. If you want the best sounding Deluxe Reverb that Fender currently makes, it's the 65 reissue, and change the speaker and remove the bright cap. So their thumbnail says, hey, hand-wired versus PCB, and that's not at all what the comparison is. It's very different circuits with very different voltages and very different speakers. So if I have not seen it, if they have the stock 65 reissue speaker, the Eminence, the C, not the Eminence, it's a Jensen, C12K, then the 64 is going to wipe its, you just wipe it out because that's a much better sounding speaker that's in the 64 custom. But the amp itself, if you were to play them both with the same speaker and they have equivalent quality tubes, the 65 reissue is going to sound better. But from the outside, from a player's perspective, they look pretty much the same, and one's hand-wired and costs a lot more, so you would expect it to be better, but the difference is not hand-wired versus PCB. Now you put that against a real hand-wired Deluxe Reverb reissue, you're going to hear marginal improvements over the 65 reissue. You're going to hear dramatic improvements over the 64. So it's a weird thing. And I'll say that to their face. If either of them, if my comment gets back to them and they want to reach out to me, I'll talk to them about it. The stuff on the outside is not that important compared to the stuff on the inside. And most people on YouTube with guitar channels who describe amps are just talking about what they hear and what's on the outside. And it's in some ways, it's very surface level. You can say that, hey, as long as it sounds good, that's great. Sometimes it could sound even better for less money. Tupadoo, hey, Martin Pattison, on a blackface Super Reverb, what effect does it have on the amp if you disconnect or remove the normal channel? Well, on an original, you wouldn't want to disconnect it, but you could remove the V1, just leave V1 out, and only have the reverb channel operating. But if you were to totally disconnect the normal channel, you would have a little bit more potential headroom in the preamp because that tube would not be drawing any preamp voltage, preamp current, I should say. The shared cathode on V1B and V2B would no longer be shared, and so instead of having the equivalent of 1.6K bypassed by a 10 microfarad, you'd have 820 bypassed by a 22. So you'd have a little bit more gain, even though you have a little more headroom. And depending on how thoroughly you remove it, if you take out the 220K mix resistor that's coming from the normal channel, you will have a tremendous increase in gain, in which case it would actually be a much noisier, higher gain, more aggressive amp. But assuming that you leave the mix resistors in place and just have it run to ground as opposed to actually you wouldn't want to use 220K to ground and replace it with something else. So anyway, I digress. In theory, you would have a little more headroom potentially, but you'd have a little more gain. It'd be relatively minor though. It's like disconnecting the tremolo. It gives a little bit more gain. If you really want to play around with that stuff, change the mids, nudge the negative feedback up a little bit, or down a little bit, depending on your perspective. Goody Guitars, I have never heard of that switch. I don't keep up with all the non-standard switch options. I tend to use Oak and CTS and stuff like that. The usual suspects, because they work really well, and some of the super switches are nice. What was my experience with TAD tubes? Hey, Michael Fielka. Had some new trouble. I've had some trouble with new 12A T7s, rated high grade, even losing vacuum a year ago, but the 6L6s served me well so far. Well, good for you. That's much better luck than I've had and that Brad's had. I had high hopes when the TAD range came out, because the TAD tubes came out at the just at the tail end of the COVID issue, where we had no tubes from Russia, and China was shut down, and everything was, tube availability was a real problem. Then TAD came out with this new line, and they got great reviews, and the initial batches were very, very good. Subsequent batches, extremely microphonic preamp tubes, power tubes of every designation that don't last or change dramatically within an hour's worth of playing time. And I had some 6v6s where the bass came loose, and so you had just like the glass bottle with the tiny little filaments connecting to the pins and kind of moving around, and that's not a good thing. So I have stopped using them. I know that Brad particularly got burned on a bunch of the TAD tubes that he'd ordered. Any thoughts on BAD Soldano amps? Looking at the BAD built 20-watt Astro. I have had no experience with the Soldanos made by BAD. Hopefully Mike has maintained quality throughout that. I know that BAD builds to the standard that is set for them, and so if you give them a very good build, you will get a consistently good amp. That's what a lot of the Friedmans are. If you don't give them, I mean, they'll build what you want. If you ask China to build you an iPhone, they'll build you an iPhone. If you ask China to build you something that's you're going to sell for $100, but you only have $3 worth of parts in it, they'll build that for you. So they'll build you crap, and they'll build you good stuff. I'm not saying the BAD builds crap, but not all the companies that are being made by BAD are designing them as well. I have played the older, I believe, Astro, and I thought it was okay. I didn't think it was as good as the SLO or the Hot Rod, but those are intentionally much bigger, badder builds, no pun intended there. But I think that anything that Mike designed is likely to be a good amp if it suits your needs. It is 440 volt plate voltage on 6v6 tubes of a 78 Deluxe Reverb, normal with bias around 55 to 60% dissipation, about 21 milliamp current. Hey, Sagest Owls reviews. Sorry. Tried to make that Sage Towels in my brain. Farty owls, faulty towers. 440 is pretty normal. It's on the high end. If you want to bring that down, typically a 78 Deluxe Reverb would have a 5U4 GB, but it's also possible that your amp has a GZ34 or 5AR4 in there, which would bring the plate voltage up even, that's 440 is not unusually high, but 420 is a more desirable point. So if you have a GZ34 or 5AR4, try a 5U4 GB, and you'll probably bring the voltage down. It brings it down nominally 30 volts, but in terms of where you then bias the amp, you'll probably end up closer to 420, which apparently is a good thing to be at, right? Hey, Matt Johnson, time for new tubes. My 5E3 Tweed Deluxe build. The JJs in it have started to go microphonic. Any recommendations on current production 6v6s that would work well in a small combo? Well, I always warn people about the JJ 6v6S in a combo, because those tubes become microphonic. Congratulations. I'm sorry. I was right. And I've heard that the new different mica JJ 6v6 also becomes microphonic. I have had the best luck with electro-harmonics. I think Brad recently had some bad electro-harmonic 6v6s, if I recall. But you can also try Tungsol. They have been very good in the past as well. Hey, Sagest Owls. Sorry, I wish people would put capitals. So if it was Sagest with a capital S, then Owls with a capital S, then Reviews with a capital R, Owls with capital O, not Sorry. Anyway, I'm not singling you out. It just when the usernames are all lowercase and it's this long, it's hard for me to make that into language. But he does have a 5U4GB. Well, as long as your heaters aren't over 6.8 volts, the 440 is fine. You're right at the edge of what a 6v6 can handle happily, but it's going to be all right. If you're really worried about it, you could do a Zener diode trick on the screens, which is take a 30 volt Zener in series with like a 47 ohm 2-watt resistor right at the screen. And I can't remember off the top of my head which direction the cathode on the Zener goes, but that's easily found. Look up the Zener trick screen voltage. You'll find examples. That would bring the screens down below 410, 420. Even if the plates are high, your screens will be within closer to the datasheet max, and the tubes will be happy. A 6v6, the datasheet max for screen is like 350, and you can get away with exceeding the datasheet's voltage on a 6v6 to a degree. 440 is pretty much at the healthy limit of that push, though. Spoiler, the speaker made all the difference. Well, that's not much of a speaker. I mean, that's not much of a spoiler. I saw someone else said I saw it scrolling by here because I've got the sequence that I'm answering here, and I've got the real-time sequence down here. They preferred the 65 to the 64 because the 64 speaker broke up too soon. I wonder what speakers they had in the 65, but the 65 usually comes with a C12K, which is like the worst possible speaker you could use in a Deluxe Reverb, but you can also get them with like a Creamback 65, which is one of the best speakers you can use with a Deluxe Reverb. So one of, not the, but one of. Hey, Robbie, yeah, the Lely stuff is fantastic, and I'm sure they've got a product similar to the radial that I linked earlier for the ground lift situation. Lely, though, does tend to be much more expensive, and I find that between radial and Lely, in terms of the circuit design and the sound performance, they're about the same. The Lely stuff has really incredible, beautiful graphic design, and they're coming from Europe, so they're more expensive on that front. They have those fantastic mushroom foot switches and stuff, and the Lely stuff is gorgeous. But in terms of just basically an unbalanced DI with a transformer ground lift and polarity option, I think in this case the radial will be the option. But the Lely stuff is fantastic. Hey, Chris R. Got a 65 AC4 at a bargain price. All components date back to 1965. Apart from new electrolytics, what would I advise? Would like to add a speaker jack. Bad idea? I add speaker jacks to old JMIs all the time. There are two ways to do it. If you're willing to drill the cabinet, you can put drill like a 1-inch hole in the wooden board, and then put a piece of aluminum over it. You can get aluminum octal plate covers from various amp supply places, CE Distribution, which is also tubesandmore.com, etc. And you could bolt that over the hole and drill a 3/8 inch hole in that and put a jack in that if you wanted to. Or you can just get a Switchcraft plug that's goes to a speaker cable on one end, the other end's female, and wire the other end, two ends to the little terminal strip inside the amp, but just have the 1/4-inch female end dangling in the amp that you can connect speakers to. On an AC4, I've got my Vox book over here. I'll show you. Sorry, it was partially under a 59. 62 concert. This was partially underneath the amp. On AC4, especially from 62, you might have Hunt's caps. If you have the Hunt's caps or you have the brown Wimas, they always go bad. If you have the gold Wimas or you've the trophy foils, or you've got the Phillips mustards, you're probably okay on the film caps, but they can leak, and you're going to have probably a whole bunch of carbon comp resistors that are no longer specifically very good, especially the big fat white ones. The Erie resistors always fail. But beyond that, two major things. First of all, almost there. All right, here's the AC4 schematic. And the inputs, let's see if you can see this. The inputs here. You see that? 100K resistors from each input jack, and then a 1 meg to ground. That way you always have a good a voltage divider right at the inputs, always attenuating the signal there. If you rewire those input jacks like you find on the AC30 with the 68Ks and the 1 meg to ground before the mixed resistors, which are also grid stoppers, you'll have a much wider dynamic range available from the amp. Vox did that so the AC4 would not be nearly as loud as the AC10. And they did a similar thing on the AC10, so it would not be nearly as loud as the AC15. It's an intentional handicapping, but if you change the input wiring to that of the AC15 or AC30, you'll get quite a bit more gain out of the amp if you want. The other thing is, due to the way the cabinet is, the thing is constructed. I've got an AC4 here, sorry, an AC10 here, but I can't bring it over easily. But most JMI circuits have like one aluminum C-shaped thing here. So if that's the C part, and then there's a steel one going out here, and those are just bolted together, and that's supposed to be a continuous ground from this kind of chassis to this part of chassis. But over time, not only does the hardware get slightly loose, but everything gets dirty where the metal makes contact with metal, and crud builds up in there. So separate the two halves of the chassis slightly. You only have to back off the hardware a little bit. Just get enough in there that you can flush all that out with alcohol, and get in there with like a Q-tip or a paper towel and a butter knife to get all the crud out. Then flush it out again, and then deox it and get all the surfaces as clean as possible, and then bolt it back together as tight as possible. Hey, Chris from Rift made it here. Wow, very cool. And Chris has had good luck with the JJ double micas. I've heard mixed things, Chris, but I'm glad you got a good batch. Anyway, once you do that, and so this aluminum chassis is now fully making contact with the steel chassis, and all the hardware is tight and the surfaces are clean. Now this thing which is supposed to be ground and this thing is supposed to be ground actually works as the circuit intends, and then you have a much better behaving AC4. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, Chris there at Rift Amps is a great tech from the UK. He makes really nice custom amps as well. If you wanted to get a good hand-wired Deluxe Reverb or Princeton, for instance, Chris be the guy to talk to if shipping to from the UK is feasible and affordable for you. But why would Fender ruin their own circuits? Makes no sense, but everything has a reason. Well, at the root of every modern enshittification is an MBA who figured that it would make them more money. So I don't know why they use the crappy C12K, for instance. And I don't know why they do other things that they do. But at the end of the day, you can change. You know, the Utahs weren't fantastic either back in the early 70s, and the Piles, oh my God, in the later 70s. You know, but you can get a good speaker, $75 to $150, and there you go. You got a good sounding Deluxe Reverb. or you can buy one of the limited editions that comes with a creamback and be happy from day one. It's amazing how many Deluxe Reverb players don't even know what speaker they have or realize what a difference the speaker makes. And it's not just Deluxe Reverb owners, but at the end of the day, no matter what amp I'm playing through, no matter what pedals I'm using, etc., from the moment my finger or a piece of plastic or whatever moves this string, and it doesn't matter what the string is, once I move this string through this pickup or this pickup and all this stuff, through all this stuff and all that other stuff, the purpose is to transfer this vibration into a speaker moving. And which speaker is moving and in what enclosure and of what materials it's made and the environment that it's in, that's the whole game right there. You can have the world's best amp into a crappy speaker and it'll sound like a crappy amp. You can have a pretty middle-of-the-road amp run into a fantastic speaker and use it to record an album with. And a fantastic sounding speaker does not correlate to the most esoteric or expensive speaker. You don't have to find a JBL from 1968 or a pre-Roland Marshall, or, you don't have to break the bank. You have to find something that sounds good to you, that can handle the wattage and the correct impedance. There's so many good speakers available from about $75 up now. We're in the golden age of speaker availability. Have I revisited the ToneMaster Deluxe after firmware updates? Just curious if I'd have a recommendation on a speaker for those amps. I have. I thought it sounded pretty much the same. Let's put it this way. It still has that bad compressor pedal built in. And I don't know whether that's something they're doing intentionally or whether they have a limiter in the software so that they cannot clip the power section, or whether the power section is, it's a 100-watt capable power amp, but it's being limited to approximate the output of a 22-watt Deluxe Reverb. So it's being limited somewhere in the 45-watt range area, I think. We'll talk about Deluxe Reverb 22 watts measured clean versus how much the amp actually puts out. But the damn thing ships. One of the speakers they ship is a 65-watt speaker. They don't have that power section running the full wattage. Anyway, I thought it still felt weird when you pushed it. When you push the amp, it falls apart. When you just play clean, it's gorgeous. It has one of the best sounding digital reverbs on the market today. But it's a very expensive one-trick pony. As far as the speakers, I've played the creamback version, and I've played the Neo creamback, and I've played the Neo 12K. The Neo 12K sounds exactly like a real C12K. It is an awful sounding speaker. And the Neo creamback sounds an awful lot like a Creamback 65. It's just a little bit brighter. And maybe in time that would lessen as it relaxes a little bit. So I think the Creamback 65... the Neo Creamback is a good speaker and a good choice for a ToneMaster Deluxe. But sadly, the Neo 12K sounds exactly like a C12K, which means it sounds like it's all up in here. I'm a C12K. I don't have anything over this. I don't really have any lows either. I'm just kind of, you don't expecting speaker impressions on the channel, were you? Did I end up keeping the K-Line Springfield? Yep, it's hanging right over there. It is a thing of beauty, and I love it. I don't care about the headstock shape, but, I don't have to hear the headstock shape. The amp itself is such a good iteration of a Strat. I've played a bunch of 62 through 64 Strats, and if you were to put that in the bunch with them and close your eyes, that's going to hang with the best of them. And it cost me a hell of a lot less than a 63, 64 Strat. And Goody Guitars forgot to turn his TPS report. Yeah, I'm going to need you to work the weekend about that. It made me stapler. I'm going to burn down the whole building. I have no thoughts on the Mesa Electrodyne. Peter Mustang. I've never heard of the Electrodyne. I hope that it is fantastic, but I wouldn't hold my breath. In 1977, hey Sages Dolls, Fender changed the Fender changed the bias filter cap in the Deluxe Reverb from 50 microfarad to 80 microfarad. Does it affect feel, sag, or tone of the amp? Is it worth changing for 50 or even 25? Well, you're very welcome, Sagist. It's weird calling someone Sagist, but I can't call you Owls Reviews. There's not much difference between a 50 and an 80 in a bias circuit. The reason they changed it is because on the Super Reverb and the Twin and the Pro, they went to dual 80s. They had an 80 microfarad on the bias board, and then like a 3.3K or 3.9K going to that weird little fourth lug on the bias pot, and from that point they had another 80 microfarad to ground. Remember that becomes important in just a moment. So they had series resistance between the two 80 microfarad stages, and that eliminated a lot of the hum that they were having. And one of the reasons that they had hum in the late 70s is that the wiring standards went to hell, and the grounds, the way they implemented the grounds, were less reliable. But all you need for the first bias stage is 22 or larger, and you don't want to exceed 100 because of charging times and rising times, and bias needs to be fully up and operational before the output tubes draw power, etc. 47 is a good sweet spot in a Deluxe Reverb. The real trick, though, is on a Deluxe Reverb, and you can see this in the most recent videos I put up, and I do this on the vintage amps as well, and it's something that the 65 reissue has from the factory. They figured this out, and they figured it out without my help. You know, they don't get everything wrong. Someone there knew what they were doing. Because there is always going to be some resistance in the bias pot between lugs 1 and 2. Typically, that's going to be between 3 and 7K, depending on how the bias is set. But all you need is you only need maybe 500 ohms of resistance for this trick to work. Then you have decoupled, you have the potential to have a second filter stage decoupling. So I'll add I'll have a 4700 watt on the bias board, then I add a 22 63 volt. You can use a 10 microfarad for this, but I have 22s out the yin yang. 22 microfarad 63 volt from the wiper to ground. And if the bias pot's about halfway, 40% to 60%, which is where I like to have the bias pot in one of those, then you've got 3 to 7K of resistance between lugs 1 and 2. So you have a resistor, you have a capacitor at the input, then you have a 3 to 7K resistor, and then another cap. You've made a dual stage filter supply, and it's much better to have two 22s there, or even two 10s there, like in a Marshall, than have 100 microfarad or 220 on the bias board by itself. And that's what Fender went to in the late 70s. And that's why yours changed. But if you only have the one cap in the Deluxe Reverb, it doesn't matter if it's 50 microfarad or 80 microfarad, but you could still add a second cap from the wiper to ground, like I was mentioned, and get rid of the remaining hum in the amp. Hey, Bill, I was going to give you a call after this. Your amp's been done for last week, and it's even boxed up. And I was like, oh, I need to call Bill and get some money out of him, price the rent, etc., and ship it back to you. And I was like, oh, I hate talking about money. Let me finish this up, and I'll call him later today, and then the day would get away from me. Okay, I'll call him tomorrow. And I've been meaning to call you all this time. Your amp's been done. It sounds great. I've been too busy to get my money from you. When I say I'm busy, I've got like 6 amps in there I've not billed yet. That's what I'm going to be doing this afternoon after this. So, Bill, you are done, and we'll be reunited soon. Hardwiring a master volume in a Fender Hot Rod Deluxe pre or post loop, tips or thoughts. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it at all in a Hot Rod Deluxe because there's no point in modifying the amp. It's a pain in the butt. Just either buy one of the ones that are already made or make it yourself. If you make it yourself, you need two jacks, a 10K pot, and a knob, and a little enclosure. you just stick or you can use a volume pedal if you've got a low impedance volume pedal, like a 25K Ernie Ball or whatever. Just stick it in the loop. But they're had one here yesterday. It was a Hot Rod Deluxe or Blues Deluxe. I think it was a Blues Deluxe. Might have been a Hot Rod Deluxe. Anyway, had a box with 2 plugs that went straight. Didn't even have jacks. Just had plugs built in that went straight into the center return. They had already got the spacing right with the pot, and they just kept that in the loop. That's the way to do it. Don't modify a Deluxe, a Hot Rod Deluxe or Blues Deluxe or DeVille or whatever. It is not worth it when you can just put it in the loop. Regarding the Blues Junior 4 in particular, is the bias still too high? If so, which parts to change? Thanks, Mike. Hey, Mike, thanks for being here. Well, it depends, because they have 2 different amps, both called the Blues Junior 4, which drives me nuts. They have a fixed bias Blues Junior 4 where the bias is way too hot, and they've got a cathode bias Blues Junior 4. And I've heard that the bias is way too cold on those, but I've not had one of those in, so I don't know. I think it's R52 and R53 on the Blues Junior 4. It's the same part numbers from 1 through 4. Anyway, they got it's like a 22K and a 33K, and the bias is fed off the junction of those two. I put like a 68K or 82K resistor across the bottom of those in parallel, and it puts the bias in a healthy range. I've got videos on that. I haven't done one of those in about 2 years. I don't remember which part number specifically. I think it's 33 and 32, in which case you want to lower 33. Anyway, past Lyle in those videos is much more aware of that issue in the solution than current Lyle, who's not looked inside a Blues Junior in about a year. But Mike, that is the solution. And if you look at the schematic, you can see where the bias is coming off the low voltage supply, which is like at -15, and then they're just taking it down to like -11 or something. And it's a 24K and a 33K, I believe. And you just want to lower the lower one to about 24K. Boop-a-doo-doo. Hey, Vinicius, got the Lele P split. Yeah, that's going to be a fantastic setup. You're I don't remember what tip I gave you on the splitter, but yeah, I guess I did. I don't remember. Sorry, I'll take the credit, but I don't remember it. Always take credit. Even if you have no memory of it, or you're sure that you don't deserve the credit, you just take the credit. That's the lesson of the internet. After having several techs in my area respectfully decline to service my JCM 2000, I've ordered a Ceriatone 2303 hand-wired. Any basic things I should look out for? On the Ceriatones, I've not had the 2203, or the... actually I have. I'm sorry. I was thinking of 2000. I have had. I've got a video up. A client ordered a brand new 2204, which is going to be essentially the same amp as your 2203, and had it delivered to me to see what it needed. I think we changed out the IC connector, because the IC connector that came with was, I think, broken as it came, because the plastic was real crap. And I think I changed the fuse holder and maybe a switch. The most important thing that I needed to do on that amp, as I recall, though, was that they had a really large, like 10 gauge copper bus wire across the back of everything, across the back of the pots and stuff. But they had never managed to get good solder joints to that bus wire. And so they had a whole string of bad grounds. And I think I removed the bus wire and redid that. If not, I don't remember whether I replaced it or whether I redid the solder on it, or if I just did it a different way. But when you have really large, like 10 or 12 gauge bus wire, and it gets any amount of corrosion on it at all, it can be hard to tin it so it accepts solder. And so it just needed its grounds redone, which is sad for a new 2203 build, but it would be better to fix the Ceriatone, which was fixable, than to get one of the Marshall reissues not reissues. The reissues from Marshall aren't that bad, aside from the heater balance nonsense. But they have a lot of bad amps, and the tiny studio version of the 2203 is garbage. Hey, Michael Fiocca, I'll look for that. I do have a lot of stuff to look through. One of the problems is I don't know whether your email is going to say Michael Fiocca or whether it's going to be Surfman92 or whatever, you know. So it's hard for me. Sometimes I'll see an email and I don't recognize the name, even if you guys are here. I don't recognize that email address. But I will look for that because I'd like to hear that, Michael. Which Friedman tone would you get you closest to 80s metal? Which Friedman would you get you closest to 80s metal tone? Would possibly be GEL50. Well, that's J.K. Lee. So I don't consider J.K. Lee metal. It's hard rock. Similarly, the Cantrell, I think, of more as hard rock than metal. But I would suggest, and I mean this with all respect, I don't know Friedman's amps as well as someone named Dave Friedman does. And Dave Friedman's got the amp panel thing tomorrow. He does it on Sundays with Jace over at Head First and two other guys I've not met. But ask Dave or send him an email, and he'll tell you exactly, you know, you tell him, hey, I love these records. Which of your amps should I get? Or if none of those, what do you recommend? I've played about 5 Friedman models, and they all have different sounds, and they're to different tastes, and they're all really well built. But as to specific, you know, I can't play matchmaker, but Dave can. They removed the flags from the chat. I'm not sure what you mean by that. My 76 Fender Twin is minor, intermittent crackling on both channels, mastered volume at 10, wax cleaned off board, and virtually no DC leakage. Plate resistors original, mostly in spec. Any suggestions? Thanks. Well, I would clean the tube sockets. I would roll tubes, make sure it's not a bad tube. I would first with a chopstick, and if failing that, I've got an electric toothbrush. I'll use the handle of I would move every wire and every component with a chopstick first, just to see if anything was slightly loose, if there's a bad solder joint. Because a lot of the times, especially on an old Fender, you can have a dome of solder, and inside that dome of solder, the component's loose. It's not actually soldered anymore. It's floating within it. It looks like it's connected from the outside, but inside it can go from making metal to contact to air contact, metal to contact to air contact. And so you can go through there with the plastic or wooden chopstick and test all those connections. Or sometimes you only have something that happens with a certain frequency, and that's why I use the handle of electric toothbrush to vibrate things much faster than I ever could by hand. You could also have a bad pot. The volume pots in particular, though to a lesser degree the tone stack pots, but the volume pots in particular in Fenders are serving as grid leaks for the following tube stage. And if the pot is not happy, that tube will not be biasing correctly. So these are the things that I would look for first. Hey, D-Mac. Saw a used Deluxe Reverb pop up at a used music shop. It's Fawn Tolex with black panel and black girl cloth, 12-inch greenback. They want $12.50. Worth checking out. I can't tell you because I don't keep up with the used prices, because in the last 5 years, the used prices have gone nuts. That seems acceptable to me if it's a 65 Deluxe reissue. It sounds like it's a limited edition, like they might have done through Sweetwater or whatever. The greenback is not my preference for Deluxe Reverb, especially if it's a 20 or 25 watts version. But I would want to look at it, at least, you know, it's probably okay, but play it and see how it sounds, and then look at Reverb and eBay completed listings prices and see what they're going for in your area. I can't tell you whether that's a good price or not. Greenback would not be my choice of speaker for Deluxe Reverb. technically it's at the correct wattage, but it's wattage clean, and Deluxe Reverb puts out more than 28 watts when you push it. It is indeed the Blues Service Book. That's the one by Steven Grosvenor. And mustards. Okay, mustards are usually okay in the old AC4s, all the old JMIs, and almost every resistor in there is going to have some amount of drift. Some of them are going to have crazy drift. Let's see. Okay, so you're also liking the EH66s, yeah. I'm putting this up here because Chris, I mentioned it earlier when I saw it in passing, but yeah, Chris at Rift Amps there says the new JJ double micas are excellent. He also said that he's, of course, buying highly graded examples. That's a very crucial thing to do. Notice that the freaking chat drifts up. It was like right here when we started this, and now it's up here again. I have no idea why it's doing this. It's done it since about 2 updates ago for this program that I'm using. I digress, but yeah, I mentioned again, time and time again, 2 brands matter less than 2 vendors. And so whether it's Tube Depot, Eurotubes, Magic Tubes, the Tube Store, find a good vendor in your area and try to build up some kind of, if you're ordering a bunch of tubes, build up some kind of relationship. Just know that, hey, these people are set up to test tubes. I use the Tube Depot for almost everything. Before all the back and forth with Canada, I used to use the Tube Store quite a bit, but right now it's just not a shipping feasibility very often, which is sad. But yeah, if you buy from a good vendor, you're going to have better luck. I know that Brad buys from a distributor, I think in Europe. So he's a little, and he does his own testing, but he has to sort out the duds. And so if Brad gets a dud, Brad's got a dud. I'm buying from the person who says, hey, I tested this lot. We had 30 duds. Send them back to the distributor, get our money back. So it doesn't become my problem. So I'll give the double micas a shot next time I need to get some maybe. But I've really enjoyed the electroharmonics by and large. Hey, Buffalo Gruffalo. I rightly call out abuse of free shipping to return new amps with tube-related issues. Thank you. I think it's ridiculous what people do these days. Do I take a similar dim view of returning a new 65 Deluxe Reverb reissue with a tremolo tick and high noise floor? Well, the high noise floor is usually going to be tube-related in a Deluxe Reverb reissue. Tube tick's just going to be lead dress. It's not the owner's responsibility to make these things quiet as they come. The amp with good tubes should be quiet. The amp with good tubes should work correctly. Trouble is, and sending it back for another one's no guarantee you're going to get a good one. Half the reissue Fender stuff, even with the good ones like the 65 series, the hardware is not tight as it comes to you. Since a lot of the grounds are made by the hardware, you don't have, the hardware is not tight. Tremolo ticking is usually lead dress. No one at the Fender factories these days is qualified to change the lead dress. Yeah, that includes the hand-wired amps. So you can take a chopstick and move the wires around V5 by 1/4 inch in any direction, 1/8 inch, and have all that ticking and stuff disappear. But no one at the factory does that. So it's another reason I'm also a big believer in supporting local stores. You go to the store, hey, Bob's Guitars, I've been shopping there since 1973, whatever, and you buy your amp from Bob, and hey, Bob, I got this amp and it's ticking. Can you have your guy take a look at it? And the store will take care of it for a warranty thing. But it's becoming a thing of the past because we're all saving money buying with Amazon and Sweetwater and Z-Sounds and all this stuff. And in some ways it's great. Some ways it has its place. But when it comes to customer service or having someone stand behind a product, where the only option should, you can't really take an amp to the UPS store, put it in a little plastic bag and scan a QC and say, there you go. It's not like buying coffee filters or something. Well, Chris, we appreciate you doing good work. Brad and I were talking the other day about the enshittification of everything. So thanks for doing your part to fight against the enshittification with us. I don't watch a lot of guitar-related channels, and I don't watch a lot of amplifier channels. But I do enjoy when I watch someone like Chris or Frank or even Brad there. And I don't say, oh my God, what is this moron doing? I don't. Because it's painful to watch most people talk about these things. It may be painful to watch for other people to watch me for other reasons, but it's so nice when I can see someone pointing stuff out. I'm like, okay, they know what they're doing. That's increasingly rare in this world. We have no Walter Cronkites left. Hey, Mr. W Play. I built a 5E3 with a Celestian Blue speaker. I'm finding I need to have the volume up to ear splitting levels to get breakup. What's the best way to get earlier breakup? I don't know what's ear splitting for you, but if you built the traditional 5E3 with a 12AY7, put a 12AX7 in V1 and get back to us. If you're already using a 12AX7, put it in the comments. I'll see it now. But that's the main thing is, you're going to have pretty good breakup with the 5E3 with the 12AX7. You'll have pretty good breakup with the 12AY7, but it's kind of dependent on your pickups. If you're using like a Strat with 5K pickups, not that DC resistance is a 1-to-1 correlation to output, but it does usually have some correlation. Versus a Les Paul with 9K PAFs, you got a 12AX7. It may be your guitars, maybe your guitar setup. You could have a bad speaker. It also depends on what's ear splitting to you. To me, a 5E3, I grab that 335, get a 5E3, turn the volume up to like 4 or 5. It's gonna be breaking up, but to me, it's not ear splitting. But you could also have some problem if you have if it's a 5E3 build. I don't know who built it. I don't know if the circuit is actually correct to a 5E3. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate that. Yeah. Well, take it to Chris. Rift amps. Chris will fix those input jacks for you. He will also find any drifted resistors, any leaking coupling caps. He's going to, and even the stuff I mentioned about separating, cleaning, and then rejoining the chassis. I think he was here when I was talking about that. He knows exactly what I'm talking about. He knows how to take care of that for you. AC10s, AC4s, fantastic amps, but they need a lot of TLC at this point in their life. Yeah, Tube Depot's got good testing. Just you don't need to do all the testing that they offer, but never buy match triode 12X7s. It doesn't make any goddamn difference. But the high gain is necessary, and the low noise, low microphonics are very nice. You built, okay, Mr. W Play. You built it. The Celestian Blue breaks up an awful lot, especially with a 5E3. I would have to see your amp, but maybe you're discovering that 15 watts is louder than you want at home. One person's ear splitting is 80 dB. Another person's ear splitting is 120 dB. So. Your Springfield is out for delivery as you watch the live stream. Well, cool. Just 1 second. I don't have an amp set up for this stream, but it's been hanging on the wall all week. Still in tune-ish. That's going to sound like terrible with that clarity on. Nice amp. This is that pine, roasted pine. It's like 6 pounds. It's insane. So tell us about yours when it gets here, man. C12K had the Jimmy Stewart cone mod. I should sell tickets. We should all watch Office Space again. Because it feels good to be a gangsta. I have no good opinion on Mesa Boogie 50 caliber 6L6. Sorry, Sash. You know, the caliber series. No sound, huh? Check. I show as having sound here. You guys hear me now? Okay. Yeah, Colby. I said I don't have an amp hooked up, so I was just playing it acoustically. So don't scare me like that. Yeah, no, the speakers. Well, Colby Jack, the sound should be good, and we all owe you a debt of gratitude for that. Colby was gracious enough to donate an Motu M6 4 mic 3 input with two other stereo pairs, so I can get 6 inputs at once, audio interface and digital audio converter. So when you see the video I'm going to be doing on this homebrew amp that was in the thumbnail, it's a stereo amp. It's got a cab with the V front with 2 different speakers. I'm going to set up 2 microphones. I might even hook up like a ping pong delay or something to show you that, yeah, this is stereo. I couldn't do that and speak at the same time with the old 2 input thing. So now I'll have a mic on each speaker and the voice, and you'll hear that, and that'll all be thanks to Mr. Colby Jack there. So everyone, Colby Jack, which also, and I think it's no coincidence, makes the best grilled cheese. Or for you Brits, cheese toasties. In all ways, Colby Jack is a wonderful thing. We are at the top of the first hour, and this coffee's been running through me. We're going to take our first of 2 7-minute intermissions. We'll do it at the top of the hour. For those of you who are new to the channel, let you grab a sandwich, whatever you need to do, and kind of plan around, because we do this for 3 hours. Well, whatever 3 hours minus 2 7-minute intermissions is. So a lot of minutes. But for my own sanity and my bladder's sanity, it sounds like one of those awful ads you get on late night TV. Have you considered bladder sanity? We're going to take the first of 2 intermissions, and I'll see you guys in a bit. And we're back. I've been accused of speaking too loudly when we come back from break and scaring people. It is I have returned. If you didn't hear the whisper, we're back. Let's see, where were we? Thoughts on new Gibson LP quality control. Hey, Warlock. Returning a beautiful ocean blue AAA quilt top that plays well because it's plecked, but it has large gaps along the binding wood, especially bass side the frets. 3 to 8. So sad. Well, you shouldn't buy blue Les Pauls, but that's me. As to Gibson quality control, I'm not sure it exists, you know. And I have 3 Gibsons and an Epiphone. The way the neck pocket is designed on a Gibson is so they have a lot of wiggle room when they're assembling it. And as a result of that wiggle room, there's no consistent neck angle. It's not like you buy a Gibson, it always has a 3-degree angle or anything. It's anywhere from that to that to that. And if it kind of sort of plays, ship it out there. But, you know, it used to be even worse back in the day. They'd come out with like really rough rectangular frets, you know, no dressing whatsoever from the factory. Just level it off and get it out the door. Scraping marks where the binding was removed. No one will notice that. So Gibsons should always be played before you buy one. Make sure you are the quality control, hopefully before you make a purchase. As much as I don't like the aesthetics of PRS and I find the pickups too bright, it's rare to find a bad PRS. You know, there are companies that actually have really consistent quality control. Gibson relies on its heritage more than its qualities or its efforts to maintain quality. They have been doing a lot better post-Henry, but a lot better than that is still a low bar. They make some fantastic instruments, but you've got to find them. And hey, it keeps drifting up. I think what's happening is I get a longer one like this, and it's aligning towards the bottom. So let me see if there's a thing I can do about this. 1 second. I think, is there a top align option? Style, dynamic. All right. It's not showing any way to, it's not giving me any control whether it's aligning top or bottom, but it sure as hell seems to be bottom aligning and then jumping up when necessary. Let's see. Let's see. I don't have any control over that, so dang it. Okay. Well, it is what it is. Let's say, wait, is it here? No. All my controls are as to whether it's let's try this. Text box truncate. Let's try that. Just 1 second. Let me see if that fixes it. Let's see. So what I'm looking for is this. We'll go ahead and do that. And hopefully that'll fix it. If that's the fix, I'll do it on each scene in this. Sorry, behind the scenes stuff. I have different scenes set up for different parts of the live stream. Maybe that'll be the fix. It was set to dynamic, and it was being dynamic in upwards as opposed to downwards or something. Anyway, one of my pet peeves is finding 220 microfarad caps in bias supplies. You and me too, Lucky Jim. I've seen worse than that, but 100 is the maximum I would put in most bias supplies. But it's always better to have 2 stages rather than one giant stage. Working on my Blues Junior and replacing the input jack, I just realized I don't have a shunting jack on hand. Just ordered one, but what would happen if I didn't catch it and put in a normal one? Hey, Dylan Kissel. What would happen is that if nothing was plugged in and the volume was turned up at all, you'd hear through the amp. You roll off the volume, you don't hear anything, but that first triode would still be amplifying. The input jack shunts to ground when nothing's plugged in, so the tube is happy. And it has, you know, it's AC input is not floating, so you're not getting the but it won't hurt anything. But it's always better not to have if you have the choice. That's really high tech, I know. Good, and I think you are again way behind the rest of the chat on the. For everyone again, let's see here. Like my phone right now, because well, let me make it so that you can see it. On my phone right now, if I tap on the screen, live is in white and it's like negative something. I'm negative 11 seconds behind. I click on live, and now it's current. And good, and you tend to be 15 to 20 minutes behind a lot, and you're not the only one. I'm not singling you out, and you are always very welcome here. I'm not trying to make you feel bad at all. I've appreciated your contributions to the channel over the past several years, and I hope that I'm not making you feel picked on, but you're often about 15 to 20 minutes behind on things. So on different browsers, and maybe you're watching on TV, there are different ways to do the same thing of making sure you're current. But I recommend everyone be current if you can be, so that when you guys talk to each other, you're responding to the same concepts and topics and stuff. Hey, Jim Holloway, can you use a 6.6K output transformer for push-pull EL84? Considerations, repercussions? I don't remember off the top of my head. Man, I'd have to look at that. Yeah, you can, but I don't know whether... first of all, I don't know how many EL84s. Are you talking about just a pair, or are you talking about a quad? They're going to sound different. You have a different feel. It's going to be safe. I don't remember off the top of my head which is optimal for a quad or a pair. These are the things I always look up. When there are things I know and I have at all times, and there are things I look up as necessary. That's in that category. Hey, Yams, could I please share my opinion about this new brand Victory amps with regard to reliability and quality? Wood enclosure, not the metal lunchbox one. Thank you. Well, thank you for being here, Yams. I've only had 2 or 3 of the Victory amps, and they were the lunchbox style. It was a Duchess and something that was almost the same amp, but sounded slightly different. I don't remember which one that was. And I imagine that the consistency is similar across all their range. They're very well built amps for the price point. I think they're a little bit artificially high in the U.S. compared to how they are in Britain. I'm not sure what the EU price is, but I have no sweeping faults with them. I would prefer a traditional build to the lunchbox due to the way the cage is done. As I mentioned in the THD Univalve video the other day, with those big thumb screws, that's the way to do a removable cage, not the way lunchbox style amps do with all the little bitty screws. But as far as the build quality of the Duchess and others that I've had in, they've been fine. I don't know that it's really a new brand these days. They seem to have a pretty good track record and a good reputation. And the ones that I've had in, don't argue against that. And I thought that sounded pretty damn good. Thank you, Emil. I don't know that I have expertise to share. I'm just crotchety and I've seen all the ways things like to fail. So, when you see all the ways not to do it, what's left is the right way, I guess. And that's worked for me. But you've got a 66 Vibrolux and a Brown Panel 63 Concert. You are so happy. Well, you should be. Those are some nice amps, especially with the Vibrolux. I'm a big fan of a 66 Vibrolux. Is it Vibrolux or Vibrolux Reverb? I like the Reverb better, but the Vibrolux is quite good. The 66 Vibrolux non-reverb is a pretty rare amp. Do screen grid resistors on power tubes influence the sound? Yes, absolutely. Does the type of resistor matter in that place? CC, carbon film, metal oxide? Not especially. I use metal film and I use wire wounds. Usually we use wire wounds, but I'll use carbon metal film as well. It matters the material matters as far as how it handles heat, because it's going to dissipate some heat, and so I usually prefer to use a wire wound. I like the AC and PC series from Vishay, the low mass wire wounds, 2 and 3 watts. Those are fantastic little things. You don't need to use the huge enamel expensive ones, but those are very nice as well. That was peak technology about 1970. But for like an AC30, I'll use metal film 2 watts, and I know that it's not going to have any problem. The amount of resistance affects the sound, not the material, as far as affecting the sound. As the resistance increases, the current and the voltage drop. Mostly the current, but there's a corresponding voltage drop. And the tube runs a little, you're going to sacrifice potentially some maximum wattage. You may or may not hear any difference. The sound will typically be a little more dynamic, that you'll compress later, or it can be more compressed depending on what the voltages involved are. In general, though, within a certain margin, you're not going to hear or feel a difference, but the tubes will last longer if you increase the screen grid resistance a bit. Say on an EL34 that had 1Ks and you go to 1.5Ks, you're not going to hear or feel much difference, but the tubes are going to be a little bit happier. If you go to a 2.5K, 2.7K, you're going to begin to feel a little bit like, hey, it's a little more touch responsive, but I'm sacrificing a little bit of max volume. But it's really slight. It's an easy, inexpensive thing to experiment with if you're qualified. For clients, occasionally I'll have an amp that's just so unique or historic that I'll get the owner in and I'll say, hey, we can do it this way or we can do it this way. All right, you play it, see if you feel a difference. In general, I have to make decisions for people. And so on a Fender, I'll just stick with 3 watt, 470 ohms. Most Marshalls, I use 1K to 1.5K, 5 watts. Occasionally, particularly on amps where the power section isn't playing a huge role in the actual sound of the amp, like with a lot of preamp distortion, I'll bias the output section pretty cool, like 40%, 45%. And I'll put in some big honking screen grids, so those tubes are much more likely to last a really long time because there's not any tonal sacrifice, if you want to view it that way. But you're going to have, especially with current production tubes, especially with EL34s, they need the extra help. That's right, Super Sean. Yeah, on the 2204 Ceriatone, I removed the big solid piece of bus wire. I took I took 18 gauge bus wire pre-tinned and put 2 ends in my drill bit and held the other 2 ends with a wrench pliers until I had a nice twisted long length of dual 18 gauge. And then I tinned that as necessary because it was already tinned, and it made the same thickness as the original single piece of wire, but it's so much better and more reliable. And I connected it to a chassis ground lug, and had all the grounds going to that. I think I floated it off the back of the pots, so the pots weren't doing any grounding, and that was the improvement in that 2204, the Ceriatone. Hey, Joachim, I have no opinion on Thomas. Oh, you guys just do this to challenge Rubinson? Rubinson? It should just be Rubinson. Amps from Germany. I have no experience with them, never heard of them. I hope they're fantastic, but I would just be idly speculating. Sorry. Any thoughts on the build quality of the Bartel era Tone King? Hey, Miliano. Yeah, the Bartel era stuff was fantastic. Of course, it's made in limited quantities, and they're going to be sought after and much more expensive than the BAD version. But I think you certainly get what you pay for. But Mark Bartel has never made a bad amp in his life, whether what he's doing now with Bartel amps or what he used to do at Tone King. So. Good. We're a few weeks away from shillelagh jokes, aren't we? Yeah, I thought about that after talking about the that pedal show thing. On the Tremolo of the Deluxe Reverb reissue, same for the 65 Twin and Super reissues. Yeah, the EU amps do have a different tremolo circuit, and I imagine that's probably the same for the amp that they had there in England. And it's going to be noisy in comparison to the opto tremolo, because the LDR used in the Roach and the opto tremolo contains, I think, cadmium, and so they cannot import that into the EU. So if you get the 65 reissue series Fenders imported in the EU, and I believe into England, into Great Britain, instead of having the traditional Roach circuit, they've got a little daughter board with a PCB version of this similar thing, which almost works, but it's a bit noisy, which is sad, because you can pretty much build that with some other opto isolators that are on the market now and get a very similar result. But it is what it is and is what it ain't. The American version, and I'm not sure what other countries are allowed to have the American version as far as having the actual LDR, light dependent resistor, is the better sound. And amp alternator, I'm sorry, unless you're a moderator, you can't post links on the stream. I had to turn that off pretty fast once I started doing live streams, because every spam bot in the world was posting links to nasty, nasty things here. And I'm not exactly a Puritan, but, time and place, people, time and place. When I purchased my Rev D20 Mark I, it had a bad hum. I was able to swap 12X7s, no help. Didn't have any 6v6s to try. Sweetwater overnighted a new amp, and I set back the old one. Second D20 is perfect. Well, that's cool that they did that. They probably would have been better off overnighting you a pair of 6v6s and putting the 6v6s in the first amp, but it's possible, yeah. Yeah, but that's a case where Sweetwater, he had a bad hum, as opposed to it's a little noisy or whatever. But I mentioned it that the owners need to stop knee-jerk sending back stuff and abusing the free shipping as like they would a pair of socks that don't fit on Amazon. But at the same time, a lot of these stores, the big box stores, have a responsibility to check this stuff before they ship it out. Because if they were to check that and find it before they ship it, then there's no free shipping issue. So I'm not anti-consumer or anti-musician here, but I think there's a lot of shifting standards on both ends of that transaction in general. But I'm glad they got you a good one, and I've heard good things about the Rev amps. I still have not tried one. Have any of the Alessandro amps ever hit my bench? Only an Alessandro rebuilt. I think it was a Deluxe Reverb reissue, and I was not that impressed. I'm persnickety though. Let me put it this way: I've seen Chris at Riffs Amps work. I've seen Brad's work. Hey, Michelle, and I don't criticize their work because I don't have anything to criticize. I've seen a lot of other techs work. I'm like, whew. And I would say that the Alessandro that I had in was not up to the standards the reputation would have you think. It was a lot better than the Cesar Diaz amp I had. And I don't know if Brad remembers that, but this was back in the Facebook days. I had a Cesar Diaz amp that came in with like a green chassis, and it was a monster of mistakes. Green paint on the chassis, and they had not removed the paint where the grounds were being made, et cetera, among many sins. I don't think Cesar had anything to do with that. I think he had passed away or was in very failing health at the time, and like his son-in-law or someone was putting them out the door. But it was sad because talking about tarnishing a reputation, and I think a very well-earned reputation before that. So Thank you, Miliano. Appreciate that. Or should I say grazie? Grazie mille. Yeah, you do remember the Diaz. Yeah, it was such a piece of shit. And like Hulk turd green too. It was awful. John Ballgame, I think Brad answered this. We got a DSL-40. When you turn on the standby off, it's mind-blowing loud. Then the volume dissipates extremely low. Do I need new tubes? It's possible it's a tube that's failing under current, but it's also possible, in fact, likely, that you've got something else, especially since it's affected by standby. I think you probably have a bad filter cap somewhere in your preamp supply, because when your amp's in standby, I'd have to look at this DSL-40 schematic, but most Marshalls, when it's in standby, there is no DC present in the filter caps, especially in the preamp. Though if the DSL-40 is switching the HT center tap, the HT secondaries, whether it's connected to rectification or not, or whether they're doing it like other circuits where they're just disconnecting the B plus before it gets to the screen and subsequent preamp nodes. Either way, your symptom sounds like a failing filter cap, which has got it shorting to ground as it builds up voltage. So it's drawing a lot of current and just sucking all the joy out of Mudville. But for the initial few seconds after you first give it voltage that's working, and then it fades down. So it's probably a cap. It's not necessarily the answer, but I would take it to a tech, and I think that's what Brad told you. I saw that during the first intermission. I do look at the stream while I'm on the intermissions. It's probably not the effects loop, John Ballgame. Effects loop would be if you have a bad effects loop, it'd probably be static as far as dirty jack something. If it's an effects loop, the DSL-40's got a solid state effects loop that's not really affected by is not affected by standby. And Brad's saying John's DSL-40C problem sounded like a nearly open circuit screen grid dropper, where the standby switch turns on the AC, so that would make sense. He looked at the schematic because he thought the same. Yeah, I think if you had a bad screen grid, it's possible it's a bad screen grid dropper that's failing under current, because when it's in standby, there is no current, and then, give it. I've had a lot of resistors that you cannot test in circuit, because out of circuit, when there's no current or voltage, they test fine. And then as soon as there's any current demand or voltage drop across them, bad things happen. So it could be something as simple as a screen grid resistor as opposed to a cap. But it sounds like something that just is not up to the task, and it fails within however much time passes between taking out a standby and the sound dwindling to its minimum. And it could be something relatively inexpensive. I would hope that it would be just the resistor as opposed to the caps. It's a lot easier to change the resistor on that amp. Let's see. Hey, Mike's 1649. Recently compared the Vox AC10 hand-wired to a stock AC15C1. The AC10 was noticeably noisier at idle, while the AC15 was quiet as a mouse, consistent with my reviews. Well, it was frustrating, and when I did the AC10 hand-wired review video, a lot of people on some Vox forum apparently found it, and so I had a lot of comments on that video for people who have never been to my channel before, had not seen any of the other amps I've ever worked on. They just saw that video that was criticizing their darling. And they're like, mine's quiet, mine's perfect, mine's great. I'm like, well, that's great. That's a fucking miracle, because this amp is designed to be noisy, and when the design is almost built to ensure that there's going to be noise, most of the time there's going to be noise. It's going to be bad. And if yours is great, either you got extremely lucky or you have no idea if it's noisy or not. There are an awful lot of guitarists out there who have really noisy, awful rigs and they don't know it or they think it's normal. And it makes me think, how bad does something have to be before they recognize there's a problem? But yeah, with good tubes, the AC15C1 is a quiet amp. With good tubes, AC15 hand-wired is a moderately quiet amp. With good tubes, AC10 hand-wired is much noisier. And it's all due, in that case, to how they implement the effects loop and the physical placement of that effects loop in relationship to the heater wires of the preamp tubes. And so it's not like one guy's opinion, man. It's like physics, man. Electronics are constants. You know, there is such a thing, even in the year 2026, as an empirical objective reality. Hey, Turd Ferguson. Never not make me smile. Wondering if it's better for longevity, reliability to go ahead and gut my Deluxe Reverb reissue and do an AB763, or just do the destupidification mods. What do I think? I think as satisfying as it can be to gut and rebuild the whole thing, you're not going to notice a huge difference in sound typically. But if you want to do it, it can be a very satisfying thing to do. It's a pain in the butt thing to do. I think doing the destupidification stuff, and it's going to sound really good at that point. You know, I've got a video up of Brian Lindley testing out two two Deluxe Reverb 68 Customs that I destupidified for him. And he's playing his Telling and his Duesenberg. And he sounds phenomenal. And I did the same stuff, and you can see those videos to see what I did. And I've shown that again and again. And it was a really good sounding Deluxe Reverb after I was done through a really good speaker. And he's a fantastic player, so he didn't need anything beyond that. So I think once the amp gets to a certain point, beyond that is diminishing returns, unless you'd rather, and I'm saying this aimed at me more than you, unless you'd rather think about would a turret board be better or an eyelet board be better than this versus putting in the hours of practice to really, because you're going to get more return from playing better than from squeezing out that 1% difference in the amp, I have to say. Gringo Pig says, have to say the new AC15X sounds way better than the C1. I have them both side by side for a short time. You mean the hand-wired or the C1X versus the C1? What do you mean, Gringo? Because the AC15 hand-wired in stock form sounds good, but it doesn't sound like a Vox due to the tones, the hand-wired. Yeah. They fucked up the tone stack. Now, you may like the sound of the fucked up tone stack, but you lose the intermittent mids. And it's a different amp. And if you like the different amp, that's good. But, and there's certain things about the hand-wired that are improvements, the way that they did the tree branch versus laddered filter stages. It's certainly, the new hand-wired is a lot better than the previous hand-wired. But I thought the tone stack was a weird thing to do because it makes it sound more like a Fender. And the Vox should not sound like a Fender. Maybe you're very used to playing Fenders, Gringo. And that's cool. If you like it, that's great. That's where it gets subjective. The amp as it exists is safe. If you like it, that's great. But as far as sounding like a Vox, the C1 is closer. It still needs a little help to get there. The Vox has never made an amp since 1969 that is all the way there. It's like Gibson putting out historic models, and every year one thing gets closer to what it was in 58 or 59, and one other thing gets done differently. It's just like, just make the thing. We all know what the thing is. Make the thing again. Make the thing that make people remember you. But no one wants to make the thing. I don't know, either saving it for some future date where we've got to save the company. Let's make the thing that people have actually wanted all these years. I'm no MBA, but it seems like if you were already making the thing everyone wanted, you'd be selling a lot more of them. But you're not wrong for liking the hand-wired. I just wish the hand-wired, since it says Vox AC15 hand-wired, had the JMI tone stack. and a little different filtering. In a perfect world, they would use that same boost circuit, which is quite cool with the LM120, and use it to really emulate the pentode of the EF86 and give us an actual AC15 with the tremolo channel and the EF86 channel. That would be cooler than anything. But you know, they're doing an almost 15 watt version of almost an AC30 without one of the most critical parts of an AC30, that freaking top boost circuit. Why is AC15 famous? Top boost circuit, top boost circuit. All right, let's fuck up the top boost circuit to make it sound more like a Fender. I know if you like it, they didn't fuck it up. But from my perspective, living and breathing this thing, I don't want a Vox to sound like a Fender. I don't want a Fender to sound like a Vox. I'm crazy. Wes was pretty surprised how nice his 2019 50s Les Paul Standard is. Only flaws that is 9.8 pounds, but it sounds great and has no flaws you can find. Well, tell you what, man, some of the old ones were heavy. Some of them are heavy. What was that thing, Alex 241? That was the Service Engineer's Guide to the Vox AC30 Valve Amplifier Revised Edition. Includes AC15, AC10, and AC4 amplifiers by Stephen Grosvenor. Fantastic book on all the core JMI amp models. Even has the reverb circuit from back in the day. Not that I've ever seen one of the JMIs with reverb. I've had some of the 70s AC30s with reverb. A light read, maybe during the next intermission, I'll get the Vox book, the JMI book, which was a gift from another kind supporter of the channel. I'm not saying that all Gibsons are bad. You know, I have three that I love, but you know, to get those three, I had to play an awful lot of bad ones and a lot of meh. Mostly of them, they're not that many bad ones. Most of them are just meh. But you say the same thing on a smaller scale about Fender. There are fewer bad Fenders, but there are more meh Fenders. Hey, New York Geology, NYC, thank you very much. What's my favorite hot PAF-style bridge pickup for EVH and higher gain, playing a 594 through a Jubilee, and the PRS pickup is too anemic? Well, thank you very much. I may not be the right person to ask, because I tend not to like mega hot pickups. If I wanted to go hot, I've got the Sore Thornbucker in that Strat over there. That's my high gain PF in a Strat. He's got a hotter version of that out now. I might be interested in trying, you know, a classic like the Super Distortion or the Custom if you want to do the kind of the Van Halen thing. I know there are a lot of variations on that. Or I might try the old Lifeson, what's it called? The Bill Lawrence thing. But that's a very specific sound, so I probably would not want to have that be my only one. I don't know that I'm the right person to ask for that. But you know, Def Leppard did pretty good with the Super Distortion, and Van Halen had variations on the Custom apparently in a lot of his Kramers and stuff. I'm not sure if, you know, find amps that have these things and play them. That'll tell you more than listen to me talk about them. Yeah, there's some architecture you just can't dance about enough. And there are guys out there who just nail certain sounds from certain albums, and they have they've tried 87 different pickups until they find the one. Trouble is the previous 84 were also the one. I found it until the next one. You know, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if there is a perfect anything. Hey, UE Sync. Induced microphonics into my tubes connecting a pedal in my signal chain, and Maz 18 non-reverb head volume was on at 9 o'clock. Now, if a metallic frequency resonance not present before, help troubleshooting. Thanks. I'm not sure how you would induce microphonics with a pedal unless you just had some crazy hot signal, and you're probably the first preamp tube, V1, didn't like it, which is a sign that that tube is probably on its way out. But if you have a metallic frequency resonance not present before, while the amp's on, with the back of your nail, just lightly tap on the tubes. Or use a pencil if you're afraid to burn your finger. And if you hear it coming out of one tube more than the others, that's the tube to change. That's more likely than anything else. It's not going to be anything in the circuit of the amp. It's going to be a tube, almost guaranteed. Maz 18 non-reverb is a really nice amp. The reverb version of the combo's got some hum issues, but the non-reverb is phenomenal. That's the combo's, the head version is awful. The head with reverb is awful, but the non-reverbs are all good. For a current limiter, how to determine what bulb wattage is needed? Well, let's see. I don't have one handy right now, but on the back of most amps will be a nominal current draw. And so you want something rated for at least, they're going to say have a voltage rating, like 130 volts, 140 volts, whatever. And so you kind of want to have a bulb higher than that. So you don't want to use like a 40 watt bulb or a 60 watt bulb. But in general, most of the time I use that 150 watt bulb right there. If I get on an SVT or something, I'll put a 300 watt bulb in it. Most amps are going to be 150 or less in terms of the draw from the wall. It gets complicated versus, wattage hours and amperage hours versus what you would instantaneously read. But in general, 150 watts for most guitar amps, 300 watts for a really big mega amp. That's pretty much my rule of thumb. If you're really doing like a champ or something, you can use like a 80 watt or 100 watt bulb. If you have any concern that it wouldn't be lighting up enough if there was a partial fault. I cannot share my thoughts on a Carol Ann Texas 50 Keith vents. I have no experience of those or knowledge of them. Sorry. I think Goody Guitars is asking Brad telewiring questions. I'll let Brad answer that because he's going to have the same answer I would. Hey, Zapruder Pedro, if I chop a Baldwin orgasonic organ, are there any parts I should be looking out for other than output transformer, power transformer choke and tubes, or no G transistors in this one, all tubes? Man, if you want to do that, good luck. I think it makes no sense to do that. Transformers suited for guitar builds are not expensive or hard to come by, and not all the things in an old organ, orgasonic or not, are suitable or the best choice. And so using something just because you have it is not always the best. Put it this way. Someone who's qualified to build a great sounding amp using old organ parts would already know enough about all the variations in transformer design and current draw and all that they wouldn't have to ask if it's worth it, etc. I'm not trying to put you down, but that's not the best way to learn. That's not the best way to get an amp, especially any Baldwin thing. Baldwin was always built to be the cheapest possible. Yeah, I know Willie Nelson played a Baldwin amp. He bought it when he was broke. He liked the sound, kept it going. It's amazing that how many others they've had to buy to cannibalize to keep that one amp going. But usually Baldwin is not a good sign of quality. And I would not want to necessarily use Baldwin transformers unless they were surprisingly high quality, that they grudgingly used just because they had no choice but to use a Habor or something. Just acquired a 68 Bandmaster Reverb that has been converted to AB763, and the mid-knob was converted to increase negative feedback. Do I have any recommendations for maintaining this amp long term? Well, there was no AB763 Bandmaster, but the Bandmaster Reverb is a cool amp. And the mid-knob was converted to increase negative feedback. That's a really bad idea, bringing the negative feedback that close in the middle of the treble and bass tone stacks, because it's a preamp signal. You want to keep that as far from your negative feedback stuff as possible. And the mids is a much more useful knob to have in one of those than a negative feedback thing. Do you have any recommendations for maintaining the amp long term? It's going to be the same as all the other 60s and 70s Fenders I have up on the amp, so up on the channel. So go to my playlists and find my Vintage Fenders playlist and look through there, because you're going to see the same stuff over and over and over again. That's going to apply to your Bandmaster, modded or not. But I would be very hesitant to ever bring any part of the negative feedback close to that part of the preamp circuit. Keep that on the other side of the phase inverter. And same way I don't like a master volume right by the input jacks. Keep the input signal away from the later stages, or you're going to potentially and very likely have all kinds of intermodulation and bleed and cancellations and nastiness. Hey, David Allen Hendrick. Yeah, I was looking for that. On this program, which is called ECAM, the issue was fixed versus dynamic, and apparently it was an update that I was not aware it was updating, because it used to always have the thing start here and go longer as necessary, and I thought that's what they meant by dynamic. But for some reason, with the change, it kept the bottom here and expanded up towards the top. That's how I get that creep. Since I made that change from dynamic to I think fixed or variable. What did I call that thing again? Let's see here. What was it called? It was called edit text. It was called text box truncate. All right. So on eCam, the answer is text box truncate, and I'll have to recreate that on the next after the next intermission. But it's the same concept. It's always fun when they change the names of things. Goody Guitars. I've been looking at your interchange here with Brad about tele-wiring. And it is so important, if you're going to do this, that you learn why. So you're not just copying diagrams. You have to spend in the time to learn how it works. And it's, all things considered, is one of the simpler things to get a handle on. And the nice thing is, it's a very inexpensive, safe thing to experiment with, because the parts are cheap and nothing's going to blow up if you get it wrong. Worst comes to worst, you don't have signal, or your ground isn't good and you hear an ah. Neither of which are life-threatening. Again, the Ann Arbor Guitars A2 guitars by David Collins series on YouTube is fantastic. Let me find that real quick and put that in the chat for you. Let's see. Let's see. Pause. I just want a link to it. Don't want the... All right. Good guitars, and everyone interested in knowing how guitar wiring works. Start with that video right there from David Collins' excellent series. He covers different pot values, how the pots work, how tone circuits work, different cap values. Can you hear a difference between the materials? What's the difference in, he takes you through the whole thing. He shows you examples playing on guitar, clean, but still. He shows you looking at waveforms on a scope and on various meters. You can see how it works. You can see the difference between a log taper and an audio taper. He does a very thorough job. Now, those videos were like 10 plus years ago, so they're not the highest quality compared to my beautiful face today. But the information has stayed the same because the technology has stayed the same, and he did a great job. Otherwise, I'd make my own version of those videos saying the same information, and I get the clicks and the likes and the YouTube revenue. But I'd rather send it to David because he already put in a lot of work, and he does such a great job. Hey, James Greenlee. I'm a big fan of your punches. I've got a Trainer Bassmaster project amp. It just scrolled on me. Topology is similar to early Marshall Bassman. Values are pretty far off. Rebuild, restore as is, or lean into the Marshall voicing. Rebuild a YBA1 as is with the following changes. Replace this 5 amp circuit breaker with a fuse like you'd find in a Marshall. Simplify the standby switching because that thing's got a crazy standby. It's got linear taper volume pots, which will take your head off as soon as you turn them up at all. Change the 2 volume pots to audio taper. And it has an enormously bright cap. Lower that to like 250 or 100 picofarad, or even remove it. It's a bright sounding amp without that. Other than that, and making sure that all your grounds are good, the stock YBA is fantastic. I've got some videos up on the channel. If you search on my channel for Trainer, it'll come up. And they're great. They're older videos. I don't get a lot of trainers, not as many trainers here in Memphis as there would be in, say, Toronto. But I love them. Don't like carrying them, but I do like the way that the top of the cabinet just comes right up and you have easy access to everything. And Brad's adding another good book on guitar electronics. Guitar Electronics for Musicians by Donald Brosnack. Sorry, I can't read. Donald Brosnack. I'm not familiar with that book, but if Brad's recommending it, it's good. I will tell Kyle you said that, Emiliano. Grazie. You're my friend. It is correct. I get called Kyle an awful lot, which is not one of my favorite things. But I understand on one level, but it's pretty easy to spell. Of course, I just called a Donald a David, so Hey, Jack Smith. Why is this thing scrolling on me all of a sudden? I've watched many channels talk about buffers and pedals, and I'm more confused than ever. Apparently there are bad buffers and good ones, makes my brain hurt. Please clear up if possible. Well, to clear that up fully would take probably a 1 hour video just on that subject, and I would have to have diagrams and circuit examples. In a nutshell, traditionally buffers have been an afterthought in most guitar pedals, and the goal was only to say, all right, we can either not have a buffer, and then we have it, and because of the way they didn't used to have double pole, double throw switches. Foot switches used to be single pole, double throw, and so you would basically route the input of the effect both to the switch, which would go to one possible destination would be the output jack, or let me rephrase that. The input signal would come from your guitar and would run to a pole on the switch, and it would run through the entire circuit, and the switch would choose whether the output of the circuit or the direct out of your guitar fed the output jack. The trouble is that is a huge load on the guitar because all that circuit is being hung off your volume pot. And if you have 5 pedals in a row, then you have all those things that are always being hung off the signal. even if you're not hearing them. It's why people wanted to have true bypass pedals. The craze started in the 90s. But what they started to do is to say, well, okay, well, we can't change the switch, but we can put a rudimentary buffer in so that all that stuff loads up the pickup less. And so they did, but it was always, what can we fit in this existing small pedal? And usually it'd be just a transistor. And then say, all right, well, we got a 9-volt supply on the transistors. We already have we can create a half voltage point and bias a transistor to that. So it's a really quick and dirty, rough way to make the guitar not be loaded down as much without using a true bypass. But it wasn't an ideal buffer. It was just better than the alternative of having no buffer. I have here a Klon build, which has the original Klon transistor buffer, which is not very good. And I have a little dip switch in the Klon pedal, and if I can turn on or off the buffer, if I turn on the buffer at all times in the background, there's I turn it off. In the past 20 years, there have been a lot of new topologies, new devices that we can use to create a really good sounding buffer. Now, typically, to make that a really good sounding buffer, not only do you need a really good transistor or a really good op-amp, etc., but it needs to have a much higher voltage supply than 9 volts. Because a 9-volt supply with a transistor is effectively a 4.5-volt supply, because you usually have a halfway point for the reference. Same for an old op-amp like a 4558. And so whether it's in this TC electronic polytune, which has a little op-amp with a pretty high voltage supply, or the stuff I used to build, which had a 30-volt rail-to-rail supply, so 15 volts positive, 15 volts negative versus 4.5. So a 9-volt versus 30-volt, that's a huge difference in headroom and lower noise. And I use analog devices, op-amps that were like $4 each, as opposed to a 4-cent transistor. You go back to the late 70s and 80s, and Pete Cornish was building his buffer, which people still really seek after. He was using very, very nice transistors that he was sorting for certain qualities, and he knew what he was doing. He was building really nice sounding transistor buffers, opposed to the not very good one found in the Klon, opposed to the very bad ones found in a lot of older pedals. So today, there are really good buffers, both standalone and integrated into certain pedals, but not all pedals have the same level of buffer built into them. The one in the Polytune is really good. If I didn't think it was really good, I wouldn't use it, but I use it if I'm using pedals. That's always in the circuit, and it's in a very nice sounding buffer, and it doesn't add any noise, doesn't seem to add any coloration. I've done very exacting tests. I've done sine wave tests with and without it, with the sine wave generator. Total cancellation. I've read pink noise through it and not through it, and I get almost total cancellation. Some very high and low frequency stuff is different, but anyway, I digress. But that is very different than the buffer you might find in like an old Ibanez pedal, which does have a buffer in it, or a Boss Chorus pedal, which does have a buffer in it, and those are transistor based. Some of them are op-amp based, but they're still pretty low voltage power supply. So there are always compromises because it's an afterthought. Beyond that, it would be another 40 minutes, and then I have to get really into the weeds. But it's easy and cheap to do something good enough for most people. It's harder and more expensive to get something done really great. In theory, a buffer is transparent. And I think that this TC Polytune buffer is like the beginning of more than good enough, because you can't hear it. There might be something that's even better on paper. In fact, I know that the one I used to build was better on paper. In the real world, if you can't hear it, and if you use it, nothing is loaded down, and you can use low capacitance cables without any issues at that point. It's doing what it's designed to do. In a nutshell, after all that, if I plug this guitar into any good amp with a 10-foot cable, and then plug that 10-foot cable into this buffer, this TC tuner, and then from there with a 20-foot cable into the same amp with the same settings, the sound will be the same with 30 feet of cable, with the last 20 feet after that buffer, as it was with just 10 foot of cable into the amp. Whereas if I were to take this guitar with a 10-foot cable, plug it into an amp, and then play the same thing with this guitar and a 30-foot cable, you'd hear a change. You lose some highs, lose a little bit of level with the 30-foot cable. But the nice thing is with this buffer, I could run a 10-foot cable to the buffer, and then 100 feet from the buffer to the amp, it would still sound like a 10-foot cable. If I do that with a cheap buffer, you'll hear a sound, but it'll also have a to it, and you may lose some dynamics. Hopefully all that helps. I said it'd take an hour to do it for real. I still went pretty long on that. Well, speaking of long, we are at the next time for the next intermission. We're at the top of the second hour. So we will come back to Tor's question about his 5E3 in another 7 minutes. See you guys. And we're back. Let's see, where were we? Sorry, it scrolled on me. Hey, Tor. My 583 clone has bus wire running all along all the 3 pots straight to the ground lug of one of the inputs. Would it be better off removing the ground connection this way and soldering a wire? Couple of variables. If you have CTS pots, then the grounds of the volume pots can be made right there to the back of those pots, and the 5 nanofarad cap on lug 1 of the tone pot can just go to the back of its pot, and hopefully you have switchcraft input jacks, the 12As or whatever, in which case they're already grounded, so that bus wire is redundant in that case. The bus wire should not be there at all. If you have alpha pots, which are more difficult to solder to, and there's no need to solder to them, what you can do, preferably to a ground lug attached to the chassis, but you can do it to the negative of one of the switchcraft jacks, is run a new bus wire about that far behind the pots up in the air and hang the cap to that, and the wire from each ground connection on the volume pots to that wire. So that bus wire, which is providing ground for the 2 volume pots and for the tone stack, is running straight to the input jack ground. Make sure that jack is very tight, and double check it every few months. Make sure it stays really tight. If you have a tooth washer and you really tighten it, it should never move, or not for decades. And not use the bus wire attached to the shells of the pots at all. That way you won't have any potential for ground loops. That's the way to do it. If you look at what Leo did, each of those grounds was made to chassis through the brass control strip. But conversely to all that I just said, on the 5V3, which is not a particularly high gain circuit, you may be fine the way it's built. It may be absolutely fine. Sometimes it is, but in general, it's best to avoid multiple connections to ground through the pots tied together with the bus wire. Certainly makes a huge difference in a Marshall, which is also not a terribly high gain amp, but let's see. I have 120 volts coming out of my wall, but 370 volts at pin 3 of my 65 Deluxe Reverb reissue. I just replaced the filter cap. Should I be concerned? Well, no, pin 3 is the plate, if you're talking about the output tubes. In fact, that's a little bit low. It sounds like you probably have your amp bias too hot. So you want to bias a Deluxe Reverb typically 55, 60% dissipation. And usually the B plus on a Deluxe Reverb is going to be somewhere between 410 and 430 volts. If you're down at 370, it's probably not a filter cap unless you've made a drastic error with your filter caps and one of the new ones is partially shorted. What is your B plus at pin 3 or at the reservoir node with the tubes pulled? You could also have a bad output tube, which is just pulling all that down. Let us know, Alfred. Let's see. Philip Sace plays a twin head that was rebuilt by Cesar Diaz. Well, the work that Diaz did a long time ago seems to be very different than the stuff that was made as a Diaz amp. I'm not sure how much, if anything, Cesar had to do with most of those, but I don't know the story. But the ones that came out that I had that could not be used on any stage as it was built, which was awful. How sacrilegious would it be to use a turret board in Fender Deluxe rebuild versus eyelet? And does it even matter? The only way that matters, and I've talked about this on other streams, is if I have a FR4, fiberglass epoxy board. If I put eyelets in that board, and I mount the board to the chassis using standoffs, any solder in those eyelets can easily drip down either form a stalactite, forming a short to the chassis, or just puddle down beneath. Because there's on an old Fender, there's two fiber boards. There's one without holes beneath the eyelets, so the eyelet could fill with solder, and that solder really couldn't go very far. Whereas if the board's up in the air, there's air gap, it can be a little bit trickier to solder to, kind of like some of those old Gibson amps where the big eyelets and nothing beneath them, and you get stalactites forming. Versus turret boards, in which case you're much less likely to have any solder drip. Turrets, I think, are actually preferable for me, in my experience, when prototyping, because it's easier to, if you design it right, it's easier to change things out on a turret than an eyelet. Both can be used quite well. I think, given the lack of an insulation board, unless you were to mount, sandwich another FR4 board beneath the one with eyelets, you might have some complications with an eyelet board compared to a turret board, but either is fine. As far as the sound goes, it's neither. You can't tell the difference between them. I was thinking about your Gringo Pig, your AC15 comparison, because you like the normal channel. Remember that the AC15 normal channel on the C1 has got a 330K resistor in series before the volume pot, and I always suggest to people jumper that because it neuters that channel. So the stock AC15 C1 normal channel does not sound as good as the stock AC15 hand-wired normal channel because of that difference. So that's, you want to pay several $100s more for the hand-wired versus change out or jumper one 10-cent resistor, feel free. But if you like the normal channel better, and the main difference in the normal channel is one resistor, the normal channel of a Vox is the world's simplest thing. And even the implementation they did with the LD150 on there, it's a very simple thing. It's a nice little elegant solution they came up with to give it a lot more gain with no real work. There's like 3 added components. Pretty cool trick. 4 if you count the switch. Let's see. Yeah, most boutique guys are not amp designers. They're color by numbers at best. I've never seen anyone claim that most Les Pauls were weight relieved. I think I started seeing that in the very late 80s or 90s. And I do remember when the heavier guitar was, the better it was supposed to be. I do remember all the brass hardware and the brass nuts and the fat heads, and everything was supposed to be brass. And Purple Heart and all these exotic dense hardwoods and brass everywhere. I don't think Coldacre says they didn't start weight relieving Les Pauls until 82, 83. That was right before I started paying attention to such things. Well, AC/DC only ever made the one thing. That's true. They had the one in, well, actually they had 2. They had the one in E and the one in A. Kidding. You shook me as in G. So 3 things. Let's see. What do I think of the Fender Vibrochamp Reverb amp? Is it worth $1,000? Looking for a bedroom amp. Hey, Rick Bedding. The Vibrochamp Reverb is not a reissue. though it's kind of marketed as one. It's a nice little amp. The reverb doesn't sound great, and I don't think the reverb is going to have much longevity. It's a little DSP reverb thing. Is it worth $1,000? It's hard for me to say. It would not be worth it to me. I would get a used Princeton reverb reissue. The 65, it's a much better amp. You can get it in that same price range if you look hard enough. And a Princeton on 2 or 3 is going to be the same level as the Vibrochamp Reverb on 4. Both are capable of being a great around-the-house bedroom amp, but the Princeton's a better amp, better sounding amp, and going to have more. You could use it on small stages, especially if you play jazz or something. To some people, it'll be worth it. Some people will absolutely love the Vibrochamp Reverb. I thought it was okay, but I think it's overpriced. That should be a $500 amp. Considering you can get a used AC15 C1, which again is an infinitely better amp, with reverb and tremolo for about $500 used, and it has a master volume, and you don't have to, the Vibrochamp's only got clean, so put the volume of the AC15 at like 9 o'clock and turn the master down until you're at bedroom level. It's like 10 o'clock. You've got a much better amp for less money. Let's see. When replacing power filter caps, is it necessary to slowly bring up the voltage or to form new ones, or is it okay just power up as usual? Is it amp dependent? Well, I never I never build a new amp or recap an amp with old/used caps. A new cap, if you buy the cap, it arrives 5 days later, 3 days later you put it in the amp, you don't need to reform it. If you buy a whole bunch of F&T dual section, 100 microfarad, 100 microfarad, 500 volt caps, and they sit for 6 months before you use them, it might be a good idea to bring it up on a variac and just in case it's dried out a little bit. Reforming is not really a thing. It's just not really that much of a thing. You cannot re-wet an electrolytic. You can sneak up on it just to make sure that they have not dried out while they're sitting around. But I typically don't leave caps around that much. I've got this bag of 20 microfarad, 500 volts, and I've got about a third that much left in my drawer over there. And so they might be here for 2-3 months tops before they're used. Usually they're used up within a month or so. So I don't mess with that in a new amp. I double check my work, and if it's a very complicated amp, I will bring it up on the variac or a release with the current limiter, just in case I made a mistake. But it's not out of consideration for a cap reforming or anything. Usually, if I recap a Deluxe Reverb reissue, I know that I've had the caps a few weeks. They're good caps. I put it together. I power it on. But I've been doing this an awful long time, and I'm not saying this because I am uniquely brilliant. I'm saying this because I have formed certain habits. It's like bragging that I'm really good at tying my shoes at this point. I just done it a lot. I'm kind of good at it at this point, but it's just like tying your shoes or doing anything repetitively. A real concert pianist can play chopsticks like no one's business, but they don't consider that a performance. To me, recapping a Fender, I played heart and soul, not chopsticks there. So yeah, I totally failed the chopsticks test. It's really hard to sing chopsticks. Maybe the Tibetans could do it. And if so, what equipment is used to form caps? Again, there's a lot of nonsense on the internet about forming caps, but bringing it up really slowly over a period of multiple hours with a variac and watching your current, having either a current limiter or a current meter at the very least. Otherwise, you won't know if something's going wrong. Hey, Remco, I have no knowledge of EL520 power valve. Sorry. Looking for one 1x12 cab to rule them all, i.e. I'm short on space. What are some 12-inch speakers that might work well for both the low-gain Marshall and Tweed Deluxe? Well, ET65, Creamback 65. If you don't want a lot of low-end, G12H30. Those would be my top 3 choices. Some other people would add a Vintage 30 or Veteran 30 into the list. And some people, it depends on what the wattage is of the Marshall. 1x12 with a Marshall, even a 20 watt, a greenback might be tempting fate. And there are a lot of eminences that would be good choices as well. I just tend not to get eminences very often, but I bet like what's it called? Swamp Thing wouldn't be a bad choice, or the Texas Heat. Oh, and I forgot to do this on this one, so I'm going to do this now. Doop-a-doop-a-doo. Truncate. All right. Thank you, Uncle Ike, for letting me truncate you. Thoughts on Friedman's VX30? I will have thoughts on that when I see one in person and go inside it. I might call Dave and see if he wants to send one for review that I'll then either send back or I'll buy. I don't take stuff, This was sent to me by the manufacturer, but I don't. And I get to keep it, but I don't. They don't get to see what my thoughts are before, and they won't influence my thoughts. You see that on all of these channels. Like, if someone's sending you something of actual value, typically it's going to bias your review. Even if it's a thing that only costs $150. Because if you say nice things about the $150 thing, you may get another $30 $150 things from the company over time. You may start getting $400 things from the company over time. Human nature is what it is. It's a slippery slope. So if I were to be sent a Friedman VX30 to review for the channel, it would either go right back to Dave or his distributor, or I'd say, you know what, I really like that. I think I'm going to buy the fucking thing. But I would not keep it as a form of payment. That would in no way influence my review of the product. Blah, 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 blah. There are a lot of companies out there with less knowledge of amps than me, but way more views than me, that Dave's much more, not that Dave plays the game, but if Dave's going to give away amps for reviewers, it's not going to go to me. It's going to go out to the big channels where they say, this thing's the most amazing thing and it slices your toast, blah, blah, blah. But if I do get sent one, I'll let you know. If one comes in for service, I'll let you know. Remco, I have no idea what an EL503 or 520 is, so I'm sorry. Hey, Bottom Kitchen, don't hear a lot good or bad about Rishi Muller tubes these days. I've not had any bad luck with them. I've had a few that are microphonic. I say about almost any brand. I've had a few times where they've not enjoyed being cathode followers. That's typical of all the new sensor Russian-made tubes. I like this. I used to get the CV4004s, which is a variation on a 12AX7. I really like those in Marshalls for V1. And I used to use their EL34s an awful lot. I typically would get those from the tube store, and then during COVID, there was just no supply from new sensor for a long time. And then as that began to abate, I was using some other brands. And then, starting magically in the last year, for some reason, getting things to and from Canada are a problem. So I don't think Tube Depot carries as many of the Mullers. I know they have the 34s, and I think I have used those since then, but I don't think they've stocked the CV4004s. or maybe they have and I just don't remember. But yeah, I've had good luck with the Mullards pre-COVID and post, but there was about a 2 to 3 year gap where I couldn't get them. Hey, Element 82. Question about JTM45 output transformer and tubes. The output transformer is 7K3 primary impedance. Usually that means KT66. But is there a way to use EL34 or 6L6? It's good to have options given the price of KT66s. Yeah, absolutely. You can use either. You're going to have a different efficiency. They're going to sound a little bit different. You can also do an intentional impedance mismatch. But I don't remember which way to go off the top of my head to make that work. I'd have to do the math. I don't want to give you bad advice just to try to seem like I know all. I know how to find that, but there's a way to give an 8 ohm load and set it to 16 ohms, and then you get a better primary. But it might be the reverse of that, where you give it a 16 ohm load and set it to 8. I don't remember right now. Brad keeps that track of that shit in his head better than I do, because that involves numbers, and I don't ever remember numbers to save my life. There's just because most amps would use like a 4 to 5K primary for a pair of 34s or 6L6s doesn't mean that you can't use a 7K3. You could also, well, I don't want to speculate too much. You could change out the output transformer if KT6s get too difficult to source and you don't like the sound. But there is a way to do an intentional impedance mismatch, and you'll have the correct load even with the 7K3. It'll be like be closer to like a 3K6 in its performance, which is in the Marshall 50 watt EL34 range. But you may like it the way it is. It's totally safe. You just need to make sure that it's biased correctly and that the range of the bias circuit is correct for the given tubes. I'll say that 6L6s are much more likely to get along with the bias range of an amp that has KT66s, whereas a Marshall, EL34 circuit, you might need to go less negative, like go from -50 to -40 to get to the better range, or -45 to -35, if that makes sense. Hey, Emiliano, looking for a JTM45. Are there issues worth giving it a go? Yeah, the issue, JTM45 is not a bad amp if you have to bypass the stupid heater balance pot, the little blue trim pot. I've talked about that. Brad's shown that. I've shown that on all the Marshall issues that have that little blue heater balance trim pot. Bypass that because it's a common point of failure, and when you have a failure caused by that, it often takes out stuff in the V2 cathode follower's position. You lose components there. And a lot of the power transformers used by Marshall in the late 90s and early 2000s, the Korg era Marshalls, as power transformers are unreliable, and not only can be acoustically noisy, but they also emit noise fields which can be picked up by the input of the phase inverter in those amps. If you find one that doesn't have any of those problems, and you can easily fix the heater issue with it's just 2 resistors and a snip, that can be a quite good amp, but depending on what it costs, because especially if you're in the U.S. and Canada, there are Germino JTM45 clones available used, probably about the same price, that are much better amps than anything Marshall's made since 1983. But as a whole, the JTM45, 1987, 2203, 2204, and 1959 reissues are pretty good amps if the power transformer hasn't died and you safeguard the heater supply. If you're in LA Yeah, keep an ear to the ground for a used Germino. And there's some other American brands that would probably do you really well. You know, Roccaforte, etc. But if the only one you can afford is a used beat up reissue, whatever, and there's no shame in that. We've all been there. Maybe there again. It's a pretty safe bet as long as you don't hear any bzzz coming out of the power transformer or any noise in the background when the volumes are off. If you turn the volumes of the amp all the way down, you hear a loud buzz, you could have a faulty power transformer. And know that the ground scheme also needs to be fixed in those, but that's the case for anything Marshall ever made. Let's see. Hey, old guy, looking forward to it. He's sending me an amp for some TLC. Tuner, a buffer should be, and a tuner should be the first thing in the chain, unless, I meant to mention this earlier in the buffer consideration. If you're using a wah, most wahs do not want to be after a buffer. So if you're using a wah, put it before any buffer. But as far as everything else, and some vibes, some old unit vibes have to be before buffer, but typically wah, if it exists, then buffer, then everything else. And since it's a tuner, you also want the tuner before everything else. A tuner after a chorus pedal is useless. A tuner after an overdrive pedal is useless. You want to have guitar tuner as much as possible. Hey, Merrill, you made it. Yeah, sure, pay a pal me. 58 takes that AC30 home, man. And you come on over whenever you get here. Today, tomorrow, Monday, it's cool. I'm glad you got out. Given I was a little concerned they're going to ship your old ass out. Hey, Chris Sharp, on the bench is an AC15C1 with no tubes in it. It buzzes super loud and blows mains fuse. With plates disconnected, no problem. Bad traces on board or output transformer. Huh. On the C1, there is a potential flaw. There are two potential flaws. Three, depending on how you view it. First of all, where the power transformer plates connect to the quick connects on the little board where the power tubes are, there's one trace coming from the plates, from each quick connect to the plates. On one of them, the screen supply is routed really close to that. On the other one, the grid wire is routed really close to that, either which can be a place where arcing can occur. Where arcing can occur, especially from the plate to the grid, just because they ran the trace a little too close. It happens in a small percentage of them, and it's a pretty easy fix, but I've seen it. And what I've done in that case is like, all right, well, here's my B plus quick connect that goes to one of the primaries on the output transformer, and here's the grid trace, and I can see the arcing right there. I'll cut that trace, and I'll say, well, here's where the grid comes in from the other, the quick connect, and here's where the grid actually is. I'll put a wire in there. After I cut out the trace, I'll just cut that trace at 2 points, and I'll put a little bit of clear acrylic nail polish over this cut so the board can't absorb any moisture, and then just put a piece of wire there. That's one source of it. The other thing, which is really not very common, but it is possible, and it's possible on the custom series, and it's also possible on the TBX series, is underneath the filter caps. I think it's in the C, it's underneath the reservoir cap, the first one. There is a trace. So if here's the positive hole, which is a square, and here's the negative hole, which is a round for on the cap, there's a wire trace running between them. and you can get arcing from that trace to ground or from that trace to the positive. That's very uncommon in those amps. Since you're having a buzz and blowing the fuse without tubes, and it's affected by if you disconnect the plates, there's no problem. I assume you mean you're disconnecting the primaries. That tells me it might be the trace on the power tubes board, if that makes sense. And it's pretty easy to find that, because once that happens, power the amp off. You'll measure there's resistance that you can measure between the plate trace and the screen trace, or the plate trace and the grid trace. But then the good news is it's pretty easy to fix. Let me know what you find, Chris. Thank you very much. Mahalo, Victor. Very kind of you. Hey, General Ethos. General Ethos, sir. Asked Brad this question yesterday, but what my opinion? I hope my opinion doesn't disagree with Brad's. You want to run 6L6s in the Deluxe Reverb you're building. Mercury Magnetic make the blah, blah, blah to run 6L6s, and what output transformer should you run? Part 1. Part 2 would be something from Habor's Sour Sound Be Better. You live in the Pacific Northwest. If you're gonna go with a Deluxe Reverb style build with 6L6s, you want to use a larger power transformer, and you want to use the output transformer either from a Vibrolux Reverb or a Super Reverb. Vibrolux Reverb is going to be more compression. It's got to capture wattage. It's like 28 watts clean versus 40 watts clean with the Super. So if you want a really big sound, go for the Super Reverb transformer, output transformer. If you want louder than a Deluxe Reverb but kind of aggressive, especially if you're like playing a lot of hot shit telly licks, I would go with the Vibrolux Reverb output transformer. As far as Mercury versus Habor, I don't have any experience with Sour Sound. The issue with the Habor or the issue with Hammond would be whether it physically would easily be a drop-in into an AC, into a Deluxe Reverb, because there are a lot of power transformers from Habor and Hammond, and I assume Sour Sound, that would work fine for a Deluxe Reverb complement. So basically, you'd be using a super Reverb power transformer that gives you the GZ34 tap, gives you the power sufficient for a pair of 6L6s. But a Super Reverb transformer is larger than a Deluxe Reverb transformer, which means the hole in the chassis has to be larger, and the hole location is different. One of the reasons Mercury costs more is that they make a model that will give you the same thing that would be a drop-in for a Deluxe Reverb, where you don't have to drill out the chassis. And it already has the same hole spacing. So instead of having a Deluxe Reverb transformer, it's this dimensions and 2 dimensions of a Deluxe Reverb, but it's much deeper. They have to have that extra iron in there somehow to get the same current and voltage necessary without going larger in this dimension. So, as to whether it's worth it, it depends. If you're using an aluminum chassis, it's pretty easy to enlarge the chassis and drill new holes to put a standard Habor or Hammond Super Reverb transformer in there. If you've got a steel chassis and you've never cut through steel to enlarge a hole before, and it's a thing. I've done it. It's a pain in the butt. It's a really messy, stinky proposition. It's hazardous to get in there with a Dremel cutting wheel and stuff with steel. It may be better for you to buy the specially made Mercury that's a drop-in that still gives you the compatibility. Either way, you'd probably want to use a super power transformer. I'm sure that's what the Mercury is, just a super transformer in Deluxe Reverb dimensions. And then the important thing is, Do I want full possible output? Super reverb output transformer. Do I want more of a lower output but characterful Vibrolux reverb? So beyond that, I can't tell you. The one thing I can say is please do not just put 6L6s in a standard deluxe reverb. Anyone. I'm not saying you, General Ethos, but there are a lot of guys who will put 6L6s in a standard deluxe reverb and get away with it for a while, and they think that it's fine, but eventually something gives up the ghost. It's not a happy place for either transformer and a deluxe reverb to be, and you won't actually get any benefit because the output transformer is still being a very impactful bottleneck on the situation. Oh, Chris Sharp. It's also possible that you've got a problem in the solid state rectification of that AC15, and that it's only showing up when there's a current load. Make sure that all 4 diodes in the rectifier are happy. That's easily metered. Our Pro Reverb's good amps, early 70s. Hey, Captain Thomas. I saluted the General. I'll salute you too, sir. Welcome, Captain Thomas, sir. Pro Reverbs are fantastic amps if you have the strength and back to carry them. They're very heavy. They're essentially the size and weight of a twin reverb without quite being as loud as a twin reverb. I'm not quite sure what Fender was thinking with them. They should have made them 40-watt 1x12s. Instead, they're 40-watt 2x12s. So like an inch less wide than a twin and maybe 5 pounds less, but not a lot. Maybe not even 5 pounds less than a twin. They're just as big and heavy as a twin, but they're not as loud. But they sound like twins, unless you get one with a tube rectifier, in which case it sounds like a super reverb run through a 2x12. Brad says, Fender Vibrochamp Reverb amp is an utter pile of shit. Got one in, 2 years old, already dead, no parts available. Unique winding on power transformer, in the bin it goes, 2 years old. See, that's the thing. No parts available from Fender. Most amps, if a transformer fails, if this fails, we can go aftermarket, we can get the parts. But when you make a special design with a unique winding, or a digital DSP reverb card, and then you don't support it, you're just making what's the word I'm looking for? You're making garbage. You're making garbage which lives in people's houses for a short period of time and then goes into the landfill. And it's a shame that the Vibrochamp Reverb is bad, because the Vibrochamp was a great amp. And a Vibrochamp is a simple amp. And if I had the production facilities that Fender has, I could bring a really good tube Vibrochamp to the market for maybe $500-$600. Like just as good as any ever made. It doesn't need to have reverb. I could make it the same thing without the Vibro for $400. But they're going to cheap out. They're going to either want to do it for $200 or they want to make more money. They want to make it for $900 by saying, hey, let's add reverb because we've got the committee says, the marketing research says people want blah, 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 blah. See you, Mr. Martin. Well, you don't need to cut the traces on the primary, where the primaries go, because the primaries are going to some quick connects, and those are actually very solid in the custom series, Chris. Just don't cut anything until you've verified. You'll measure if there's a conductive path forming between either primary and the screen node, or either primary and either grid trace. But if you do find that, the solution is to cut the offending section of screen or grid trace out of the way and leave the primary there, because that's much better than, because if you ever need to service the amp, you need to be able to disconnect the output transformer secondaries from, primaries from that board. So leave those quick connects in place. My plate voltage is 370 on my 65 Deluxe Reverb. Check from pin 3 to ground. Just check my bias. I'm at 18.7 milliamps. Here's my thing, is that I don't know what that means because I don't think in terms of milliamps. I do it in terms of the actual current. Let's see if I've got a Deluxe Reverb issue here. I've got a Deluxe Reverb here that was biased at, let's see, that's very cold. All right, on a Deluxe Reverb I've got here that was biased at 50% dissipation. I had, no, that's not that Deluxe Reverb, that's something else, sorry. Here's one. All right, here's a Deluxe Reverb where one tube was at 59.8% and 53.7 on the other tube, and the primary voltage, the plate voltage was 411 volts. And with each tube biased between 55 and 60%, the current draw per tube was 17.5 for the one almost at 60% and 15.7 milliamps for the other. So 15 to 17 milliamps, and yours was 18. So yours is on the high side. Yours is over 60%. I can tell that from here, but I can't tell how much from here. I see on the internet all the time, 35 milliamp or 18 milliamp, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I don't care what that is because that's going to vary on the tube type. It's going to vary on what the DCR is. So when I'm looking at this, I'm looking at it as a 12-watt tube, 6v6. Number of tubes per side, 1 tube per side. Primary resistance, DCR between center tap and the primary for each side. What the plate voltage was, I confirmed that's the same on both. And what the mains voltage was. This is 116 volts coming out of the wall. What the negative voltage was on the grid, which is negative 37 at the grid. And I know that when I go to measure the DCR, 50% in this case would be 2.2, 70% would be 3.10, 60% would be 2.66. And then so if I measure it and it's way off, I can make a quick connection. Quick adjustment, I don't have to keep measurement. But when I measure the actual DCR, it's 2.65 volts and 2.39 volts. And at that plate voltage with that primary resistance, that means that I've got 17.5 milliamps and 15.7 milliamps, which is 7.18 watts dissipation and 6.44 watts dissipation, or 59.8% and 53.7%, which is a pretty good match for an old Deluxe Reverb, if that helps. I know you didn't get to see any of that, but there's a limit to how many things I need to pop up on here and have thrown at you. Let's see, we are almost at the end. Let me get through and see if I'm missing anything. I'll never be able to answer every question in one stream, sadly. Actually, I've done it a few times, but today's not going to be one of those days. Pastor on the Tweed Deluxe. I have shown in my videos. Look at my channel on the Tweed Deluxe. Look at the search 5v3 or Tweed Deluxe, Deluxe on my channel under Vintage Fenders. You'll find a lot of how to boom boom thud 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 the Tweed Deluxe. I show how to do that. It's pretty simple. You have to be a circuit designer, not a tab A and a slot B guy, because a lot of guys just copy and paste, and Fender was not making a guitar amp. Fender was making an amp for anything with a pickup that they could sell to you, from a keyboard to a bass to a guitar to an electric mandolin to an accordion, All right, follow up on the Maz 18 non-reverb head. One of the EL84 tubes is slightly microphonic using a chopstick, seems to come and go. Can I discuss replacement stock as new old stock 6P, 14P per Google Lens? That's one of the, if you want what has been my traditional best option for that kind of thing, the Tube Store sells the Tube Store branded Russian 7189s, which is a military spec EL84. You may find some U.S. vendors like the Tube Depot that might also have 7189s. But I've also found that there's nothing about that. There's nothing about that circuit that means it has to be a 7189. That was Dr. Z's preference because he bought a huge quantity of them, which is great. But you can use a standard EL84 without any consequence. You'd have to rebias the amp for it, but that's not a big deal. I believe that, or is the Maz cathode biased? I can't remember. I think it's fixed bias. Anyway, there's no reason you have to use a 7189, which is equivalent to what you have. But if you do want to, I always used to like the Tube Store 7189s an awful lot. Like I said before, of late, it's hard to get things in and out of Canada, so I've not been getting them for a while. If you just want to go new old stock, that's great. But there's nothing wrong with just a pair of JJs or Mullard reissues. Best way to clean a badly rusted 79 2203. Jumbo thruster, I've got an old rusted Bassman up on my channel where I go into all that, and I'll show you through several videos the entire process, and it can be a lot. That's under my Vintage Fenders playlist. I don't recall what it was called, but it's called something like the worst thing I've ever seen in my life, something like that. Anyway, you'll see it. It'll stick out. The thumbnail will stick out from you as you scroll down the list. Hey Meryl, I have not had a chance to get them in back in stock yet, but I will get you some. We'll get you taken care of. It's a long way from cold water, but we'll make it work. Hey, Sire, most non-techs won't know from looking at gut shots unless you see black charring or, the cauliflower spewing out of the end of caps or the orange crusty bits coming out. Most end users won't know what they're seeing in a gut shot. Thoughts on sag and rectifiers? I've talked about that at length in other streams, Sire. Rectifiers are one small component of sag. People give them way too many magical qualities because that's the thing that, to the player's perspective, is different. Hey, this solid state amp feels and plays like X. This other amp feels more saggy. It's got a rectifier tube. It's got to be that. It's that in part. The main thing is, if you use a solid-state rectifier, it allows you to use a lot more capacitance, which gives you a much more immediate attack. You can't use 100 microfarad of capacitance for the first stage if you have a GZ34. So an awful lot of the magical attributes people give to a tube rectifier is really the magical attributes that happens when you actually give them a whole bunch of filtering on the first stage. And that applies throughout the entire amp, typically. So you compare a JTM45 with, barely any filtering at all, and like 16 and 8 in the preamp, versus a 72 super lead with massive amounts of capacitance everywhere. Wow, it sure sounds tight. Or that sounds so loose and goosey. I love how smooth it is. Must be the rectifier tube. It's not just the rectifier tube. But from the player's perspective, the only thing that they can see is that, hey, this one's got a rectifier tube, this one doesn't. It must be the tube. All right, we are wrapping this up. I'll get to things like Champ versus GA5, differences in another stream if you come back, Haraglop. I've got to go out and do some stuff at my mom's house after this, and I got to get out a bunch of invoices after this as well. Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, I think I'm just not going to be able to answer any more questions. But I appreciate you all being here. I look forward to this each week, even on weeks like this when I didn't get to get any amp videos out. I actually did a whole bunch of work on some amps this week, but they weren't all particularly photogenic. But some weeks I'm able to put out a whole bunch of videos. Some weeks I don't get any. Usually I do one or two. I like making the damn things. So look for some more videos from me soon, just so I can keep that muscle working. And I'll see you guys in the funny pages.